Alrighty, sorry about the delay there. I'd love to say, oh, I'm just giving time to people who want to join, but no, it's technical issues. Alrighty, welcome back to Free Read Fridays. I'm your intrepid narrator, Fragath, and today we're going to do the penultimate installment of Behemoth, Book 1, Beta Max by Peter Watts. That's right, it is actually two books. Um, we're going to do the first book, and then I'm going to hop to, other than my reading of Helicopter Story, which will happen towards the end of the month, um, we'll hop to Acceptance by Jeff Vandermeer, and then we'll read the final installment of the Rifters trilogy. And that'll be my two trilogies that I started, a year ago, down half a year ago. Whenever I started reading these, I don't actually remember. Sometime last year. Anyway, um, yeah, so this is the cover art. Well, cover art. This is the bit of art gallery work I went with this week by Eric Hay, H-E, done in 2016. Peter Watts has the following to say about it. I don't think I've ever seen rifters portrayed as such bony, alien creatures. These have obviously been away from the sun for far too long. I especially like the hardware around the lower face. It really adds a creepy insectoid aspect to Rifter chic. So, cute. Alrighty. So previously on, let's see, Behemoth, the Behemoth strain showing up in the Atlantic is meaner and badder and more virulent, and actually affects the denizens of Atlantis, who had fought themselves screened out using some genetic tweaking process that only the ultra wealthy have available to them. But this ignores that, unfortunately for them. The Rifters all have had that process done as well. One assumes during the as terms of the corpse's surrender, but no longer viable against Behemoth, unfortunately. So the tension is increasing. You've got Rifters placing uh, explosives on the habs that the corpses live in, corpses being the term for corporate executives. Um, and Lenie Clarke, at Lubin's suggestion, is now making those tweaks she made back in Starfish again, which allows the Ganzfeld Effect to kick in, and she can basically become a low-level psychic or empath or something. You can pick up people's emotions of their subconscious, which is and isn't helpful because rifters are generally very angry individuals anyway. So you can't be totally sure. But it's an edge, and right now Lenie Clarke needs any edge she can get. Okay, with that, let's get cracking because I've delayed long enough. If I could just not drop my bookmark for once. Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, okay. Grave diggers. Find the damn mines. They spread out across the territory like black dogs, sniffing through light and shadow with sonar pistols and flux detectors. Some of them may question the exercise, and some of them almost certainly root for its failure. But nobody still alive after 5 years down here is going to be dumb enough to go all insubordinate on Ken Lubin. Find the damn mines. Clarke glides among them, just another nose on the trail, as far as anyone can tell. Hers is not so focused, though. The others follow invisible lines, the threads of a systematic grid laid down across the search area. But Clarke zigzags, coasts down to accompany this compatriot or that, exchanging insignificant bits of conversation and intel before diverging courses in search of new company. Clarke has a different mission. Find the damn mine layer. Hectares of biosteel, intermittent punctuations of light and shadow, flashing staccatos at each extremity, little blinking beacons that announce the tips of scaffolds, antennae, danger zones where hot fluids might vent without warning. The baleful, unwavering glare of floodlights around airlocks and docking hatches and loading bays, reignited for today's exercise. Pale auras of wasted light from 100 parabolic viewports. Twilit expanses of hull where every protuberance casts 3 or 4 shadows, dimly lit by lamps installed in more distant and glamorous neighborhoods. Everywhere else, darkness. Elongated grids of shadow laid out by naked support struts. Impenetrable inky pools filling the spaces between keel and substrate, as though Atlantis were some great bed with its own scary place for monsters lying beneath. Fuzzy darkness where the light simply attenuates and fades, or razor sharp where some tank or conduit extends into bright sodium sunlight, laying inky shadows over whatever lies beneath. More than enough topography to hide an explosive device barely twice the size of a man's hand. More than enough to hide 1,000. It would be a big enough job for 58. It's a lot bigger for the 24 that Lubin is willing to conscript to the task, rifters who haven't gone native, who don't overtly hate the corpses enough to leave suspicious-looking objects unnoticed in their sweep. Rifters who aren't among the most likely to have planted such devices in the first place. It's nowhere near a sure thing, of course. Few of these people have been cleared as suspects. Not even the intel stolen directly from their brain pans is incontrovertible. They didn't hand out the eyes and the skin to anyone who didn't have a certain history. Twisted wiring is what suits a body to the rift in the first place. Everyone's haunted here. Everyone carries their own baggage, their own tormentors, their own victims, the addictions, the beatings, the anal rapes, and the paternal fondling at the hands of kindly men in black. Hatred of the corpses, so recently abated, is once again a given. Beta Max has brought all the old conflicts back to the surface, reignited hostilities that 5 years of grudging, gradual coexistence had begun to quench. A month or two past, rifters and corpses were almost allies, bitter holdouts like Erickson and Nolan notwithstanding. Now few would shed many tears if the ocean crashed in on the whole lot of them. Still, there's a difference between dancing on someone's grave and digging it. There's an element of calculation on top of the hatred, of planning. It's a subtle difference. Clarke doesn't know if she or Lubin would be able to pick it up under these circumstances. It might not even manifest itself in someone until the very moment they came upon the incriminating object, saw the mine stuck to the hull like some apocalyptic limpet, tripped their vocoder with every intention of raising the alarm, and then, maybe the bastards deserve it after all they've done to us, after all they've done to the whole world. And it's not like I set the damn thing, it's not like I had anything to do with it, except I maybe just didn't notice it. there, under the strut, perfectly understandable in the murk and all. Any number of minds could seem perfectly innocent, even to themselves, right up to the point at which that last wire stimulus came into view and catalyzed a simple chain of thoughts that ends in just looking. Let's try this sentence from the top. I got mixed up because of the way it's broken by the line break. Gosh, I hope you didn't hear me coughing there. Uh, Any number of minds could seem perfectly innocent, even to themselves, right up to the point at which that last wire stimulus came into view and catalyzed a simple chain of thought that ends in just looking the other way. Even then, who knows whether fine tuning might pick it up? Not Lenie Clarke. She searches anyway, gliding between the hulls and the storage tanks, flying over her fellows, searching the lights and shadows, only ostensibly in her hunt for ordnance. What she's really hunting is guilt. Not honest guilt, of course. She's trolling for fear of discovery. She's on the prowl for righteous anger. Newly reawakened, she swims through a faint cauldron of second-hand emotions. The water's tainted with a dozen kinds of fear, of anger, with the loathing of self and others. A darker center roils beneath the surface of each dark body. There's also excitement of a sort, the initial thrill of the chase decaying exponentially down to a rote boredom. Sexual stirrings. Other, fainter feelings she can't identify. She's never forgotten why she resisted fine-tuning back at Channer, even after all the others had gone over. Now, though, she remembers why she found it so seductive when she finally gave in. In that endless welter of feelings, you always lost track of which ones were yours. It's not quite the same here on the ridge, unfortunately. Not that the physics or the neurology have changed. Not that anyone else has. It's Lenie Clarke that's different now. Victim and vendetta have faded over the years. Black and white have bled together into a million indistinguishable shades of gray. Her psyche has diverged from the rifter norm. It no longer blends safely into that background. The guilt alone is so strong that she can't imagine it arising from anyone but her. She stays the course, though. She keeps hunting, though her senses are dulled. Somewhere off in the diffracted distance, Ken Lubin is doing the same. He's probably a lot better at it than she is. He's had training in this kind of thing. He's had years of experience. Something tickles the side of her mind. Some distant voice shouts through the clouds in her head. She realizes that she's been sensing it for some time, but its volume has crept up so gradually that it hasn't registered until now. Now it's unmistakable, threat and exclamation and excitement at the very limit of her range. Two rifters cross her path, heading south, legs pumping. Clarke's jaw is buzzing with vocoded voices. In her reverie, she's missed those, too.
Almost missed it completely, one of them says. It was tucked in under. Got another one,
A second voice breaks in.
Res A.
Oh, good morning to you, a optical antenna. Thanks for tuning in. One look, and Clarke knows she would have missed it. It's a standard demolition charge, planted in the shadow of an overhanging ledge. Clarke floats upside down and lays her head against the hull to look along the space beneath. She sees a hemispherical silhouette, shaded by the ledge, backlit by the diffuse murky glow of the water behind.
Jesus, she buzzes. How did you find the damn thing?
Sonar caught it.
With typical Rifter discipline, the searchers have abandoned their transects and accreted around the find. Lubin hasn't sent them back. There's an obvious reason why he'd want them all here with the murder weapon. Clarke tunes and concentrates. Excitement. Reawakened interest after an hour of monotonous back and forth. Concern and threads of growing fear. This is a bomb, after all, not an Easter egg. A few of the more skittish are already backing away, caution superseding curiosity. Clarke wonders idly about effective blast radius. 40 or 50 meters is the standard safe distance during routine construction, but those guidelines are always padded. She focuses. Everyone's a suspect, after all. But although the ubiquitous undercurrent of rage simmers as always, none of it has risen to the surface. There is no obvious anger at being thwarted, no obvious fear of imminent discovery. This explosive development is more puzzle than provocation to these people, a game of Russian roulette nested inside a scavenger hunt.
So what do we do now?
Chung asks. Lubin floats above them all like Lucifer.
Everyone note the sonar profile. That's how you'll acquire the others. They'll be too well hidden for a visual sweep.
A dozen pistols fire converging click trains on the offending object.
So do we leave it there or what?
What if it's booby-trapped?
What if it goes off? Then we've got fewer corpses to worry about.
Gomez buzzes from what he might think of as a safe distance.
No skin off my 4.
Lubin descends through the conjecture and reaches under the ledge. Ing sculls away.
Hey, is that a good...
Lubin grabs the device and yanks it free. Nothing explodes. He turns and surveys the assembled rifters.
When you find the others, don't touch them. I'll remove them myself.
Why bother?
Gomez buzzes softly. It's a rhetorical grumble, not even a serious challenge, but Lubin turns to face him anyway.
This was badly positioned, he says. Placed for concealment, not effect. We can do much better.
Minds light up, encouraged, on all sides. But to Clarke, it's as though Lubin's words have opened a tiny gash in her dive skin. She feels the frigid Atlantic seeping up her spine. What are you doing, Ken? What the fuck are you doing? She tells... It says himself. She tells herself he's just playing to the gallery, saying whatever it takes to keep people motivated. He's looking at her... Excuse me. He's looking at her now, his head cocked just slightly to one side, as if in response to some unvoiced question. Belatedly, Clarke realizes what she's doing. She's trying to look into his head. She's trying to tune him in. It's a futile effort, of course. Dangerous, even. Lubin hasn't just been trained to block prying minds. He's been conditioned, rewired, outfitted with subconscious defenses that can't be lowered by any act of mere volition. Nobody's ever been able to tunnel into Lubin's head except Carl Acton, and whatever he saw in there, he took to his grave. Now, Lubin watches her, dark inside and out for all her unconscious efforts. She remembers Acton and stops trying. Striptease. The final score is 9 minds and no suspects. Either might be subject to change. Atlantis itself is an exercise in scale-invariant complexity, repairs to retrofits to additions to a sprawling baseline structure that extends over hectares. There's no chance that every nook and cranny has been explored. Then again, what chance is there that the culprits, constrained by time and surveillance and, please God, small numbers, had any greater opportunity to plant explosives than the sweepers have had to find them? Neither side is omnipotent. Perhaps, on balance, that is enough. As for who those culprits are, Clarke has tuned in 3 dozen of her fellows so far. She has run her fingers through the viscous darkness in all those heads and come up with nothing. Not even Gomez or Jaeger. Not even Creasy. Grave dancers, for sure, all of them. But no diggers. She hasn't run into Grace Nolan lately, though. Nolan's the big red button right now. She's holding back for the moment. Any alleged corpse treachery looks a little less asymmetrical in light of recent events. But the way things are going, Nolan's got nothing to lose by letting this play out. There's already more than enough sympathy out there for the mad bomber. If it turns out to be Nolan, the very act of unmasking her could boost her status more than harm it. The leash is tenuous enough already. If it snaps, there's going to be 10 kinds of shit in the cycler. And that's granting the charitable assumption that they even find the culprits. What do you look for in the unlit basements of so many minds? Here, even the innocent are consumed with guilt. Even the guilty wallow in self-righteousness. Every mind is aglow with the black light of psychohazard icons. Which ones are powered by old wounds? Which by recent acts of sabotage? You can figure it out sometimes, if you can stand sticking your head into someone else's tar pit, but context is everything. Hoping for a lucky break is playing the lottery. Doing it right takes time and leaves Clarke soiled. Not doing it delivers the future into Grace Nolan's hands. There's no time. I can't be everywhere. Ken can't be everywhere. There's an alternative, of course. Lubin suggested it, just after the bomb sweep. He was sweet about it, too. He made it sound as if she had a choice. As if he wouldn't just go ahead and do it himself if she wasn't up for it. She knows why he gave her the option. Whoever shares this secret is going to get a bit of a boost in the local community. Lubin doesn't need the cred. No rifter would be crazy enough to cross him. She remembers a time, not so long ago, when she could make the same claim about herself. She takes a breath and opens a channel to whom it may concern. The next step, she knows, could kill her. She wonders, hardly for the first time, if that would really be such a bad thing. Her audience numbers fewer than a dozen. There's room for more. The Medhab, even the lone sphere that hasn't been commandeered as Banderi habitat, is bigger than most. Not present are even more who can excuse me. Not present are even more who can be trusted, judging by the notes Clarke and Lubin have recently compared. But she wants to start small. Maybe ease into it a little. The ripple effect will kick in soon enough. I'm only going to do this once, she says, so pay attention. Naked to the waist, she splits herself open again. Don't change anything except your neuroinhibitors. It probably throws out some overall balance with the other chemicals, but it all seems to come out in the wash eventually. Just don't go outside for a while after you make the changes. Give everything a chance to settle. How long? Alexander asks. Clarke has no idea. 6 hours, maybe. After that, you should be good to go. Ken will assign you to stations around the hubs. Her audience rustles, unhappy at the prospect of such prolonged confinement. So how do we tweak the inhibitors? Mac's broken nose is laced with fine beaded wires, a minuscule microelectric grid designed to... Oh, that's a girl, sorry. So how do we tweak the inhibitors? Mac's broken nose is laced with fine beaded wires, a minuscule microelectric grid designed to amp up the healing process. It looks like an absurdly shrunken veil of mourning. Clarke smiles despite herself. You reduce them.
You're kidding. No fucking chance. What about Andre?
Andre died 3 years ago, the life spasming out of him on the seabed in a seizure that nearly tore him limb from limb. Seeger laid the blame on a faulty neuroinhibitor pump. Human nerves aren't designed for the abyss. The pressure sets them firing at the slightest provocation. You turn into a fleshy switchboard with no circuit breakers and no insulation. Eventually, after a few minutes of quivering tetanus, the body runs out of neurotransmitters and just stops. Which is why Rifter implants flood the body with neuroinhibitors whenever ambient pressure rises above some critical threshold. Without them, stepping outside at these depths would be tantamount to electrocution. I said reduce, Clarke repeats, not eliminate. 5%, 7% tops.
And that does what exactly?
Reduces synaptic firing thresholds. Your nerves just get a little more sensitive, I guess, to smaller stimuli when you go outside. You become aware of things you never noticed before.
Like what?
Says Garcia. Like, Clarke begins and stops. Suddenly, she just wants to seal herself up and deny it all. Never mind, she wants to say. Bad idea. Bad joke. Forget I said anything.
Or maybe even admit it all.
You don't know what you're risking. You don't know how easy it is to go over the edge. My lover couldn't even fit inside a hab without going into withdrawal, couldn't even breathe without needing to smash anything that stood between him and the abyss. My friend committed murder for privacy in a place where you couldn't swim next to someone without being force-fed their sickness and want. And he's your friend too. He's one of us here, and he's the only other person left alive in the whole sick, twisted planet who knows what this does to you. She glances around, suddenly panicky, but Ken Lubin is not in the audience. Probably off drawing up duty rosters for the finely tuned. Then again, she remembers, you get used to it. She takes a breath and answers Garcia's question. You can tell if someone's jerking you around, for one thing.
Hot damn! Garcia exults. I'm gonna be a walking bullshit detector.
That you are, Clarke says, managing a smile. Hope you're up for it. Her acolytes depart for their own little bubbles to play with themselves. Clarke closes herself back up as the med hab empties. By the time she's back in black, there's just her, a crowd of wet footprints, and the massive hatch, always left open until just recently, that opens into the next sphere. Garcia's grafted a combination lock across its wheel in uncaring defiance of dryback's safety protocols. How long do I have, she wonders, before everyone can muck around in my head? 6 hours at least, if the acolytes take her guess seriously. Then they'll start playing, trying out the new sensory mode, perhaps even reveling in it, if they don't recoil at the things they find. They'll start spreading the word. Clarke is selling it as psychic surveillance, a new way to track down any guilty secrets the corpses may be hiding. Its effects are bound to spread way beyond Atlantis, though. It'll be that much harder for anyone to conspire in the dark when every passing soul comes equipped with a searchlight. She finds herself standing at the entrance to Banderi's lair, her hand on the retrofitted keypad near its center. She keys in the combination and undogs the hatch. Suddenly, she's seeing in color. The mimetic seal rimming the hatch is a deep, steely blue. A pair of color-coded pipes wind overhead like coral snakes. A cylinder of some compressed gas, spied through the open portal, reflects turquoise. The decals on its side are yellow and, incomprehensibly, hot pink. It's as bright as Atlantis in there. She steps into the light. Calvin cycler, sleeping pallet, blood bank, ooze, pig. Oh, okay. That's an awkward sentence. She steps into the light. Calvin cycler, sleeping pallet, blood bank, ooze pigment into the air. Rama, close the door. Something sits hunched at the main workstation, running a sequence of rainbow nucleotides. It can't be a rifter. It doesn't have the affect. It doesn't have the black, shiny skin. It looks more like a hunched skeleton in shirt sleeves. It turns, and Clarke flinches inwardly. It doesn't even have the eyes. The pupils twitching in Banderi's face are dark, yawning holes, dilated so widely that the irises around them are barely visible. Not so bright, then. Still dark enough for uncapped eyes to strain to their limits. Such subtle differences get lost behind membranes that render the world at optimum apparent lumens. Something must show on her face. I took out the caps, Banderi says. The eyes overstimulate with all the enhancers. His voice is still hoarse, the chords not yet reacclimated to airborne speech. How's it going? Clarke asks. A bony shrug. She can count the ribs even through his t-shirt. Anything yet? Diagnostic test or... Won't be able to tell the difference until I know there is a difference. So far it looks like Behemoth with a couple of new stitches. Maybe mutations, maybe refits. I don't know yet. Would a baseline sample help? Baseline? Something that didn't come through Atlantis. Maybe if you had a sample from Impossible Lake, you could compare, see if they're different. He shakes his head. A twitch. A tick. There are ways to tell tweaks. Satellite markers, junk sequences. Just takes time. But you can do it. The enhancers worked. It came back to you. He nods like a striking snake. He calls up another sequence. Thank you, Clarke says softly. He stops. Thank you? What choice do I have? There's a lock on the hatch. I know. She lowers her eyes. I'm sorry. Did you think I'd just leave? That I'd just swim off and let this thing kill us all? Kill me, maybe? She shakes her head. No, not you. Then why? Even motionless, his face looks like a stifled scream. It's the eyes. Through all the calm, rapid-fire words, Banderi's eyes seem frozen in a stare of absolute horror. It's as if there's something else in there, something ancient and unthinking and only recently awakened. It looks out across 100 million years into an incomprehensible world of right angles and blinking lights, and finds itself utterly unable to cope. Because it comes and goes, Clarke says. You said it yourself. He extends one stick-like forearm, covered in derms. A chemical pump just below his elbow taps directly into the vein beneath. He's been dosing himself ever since he climbed back into atmosphere, using miracles of modern chemistry to rape sanity back into his head, to force submerged memories and skills back to the surface for a while. So far, she has to admit, it's working. But whenever she looks at him, she sees the reptile looking back. We can't risk it, Rama. I'm sorry. He lowers his arm. His jaw clicks like some kind of insect. You said, he begins, and falls silent. He tries again. When you were bringing me in, did you say you knew a... Yes. I didn't know any... I mean, who? Not here, she tells him. Not even this ocean. Way back at the very beginning of the Rifter program. He went over in front of my eyes. A beat. Then, his name was Jerry. But you said he came back. She honestly doesn't know. Jerry Fisher just appeared out of the darkness after everyone else had given up and gone. He dragged her to safety, to an evacuation scaife hovering uncertainly over a station already emptied of personnel. But he never spoke a word, and he kicked and fought like an animal when she tried to rescue him in turn. Maybe he didn't so much come back as come through, she admits now, to this creature who must in his own way know Jerry Fisher far better than she ever did. Banderi nods. What happened to him? He died, she says softly. Just faded away, like the rest of us? No. How then? She thinks of a word with customized resonance. Boom, she says. Yeah, so it looks like I'm getting a bunch of bodies this morning. Very nice. That's what I like to see. Frontier. Come away, they said after Rio. Come away, now that you've saved our asses yet again. That wasn't entirely true. He hadn't saved Buffalo. He hadn't saved Houston. Salt Lake and Boise and Sacramento were gone, fallen to improvised assaults ranging from kamikaze airliners to orbital nukes. Half a dozen other franchises were barely alive. Very few of those asses had been saved. But to the rest of the Entropy Patrol, Achilles Desjardins was a hero 10 times over. It had been obvious almost immediately that 50 Xera franchises were under directed and simultaneous attack across the Western Hemisphere, but it had been Desjardins and Desjardins alone who'd put the pieces together, under fire and on the fly. It had been he who'd drawn the impossible conclusion that the attacks were being orchestrated by one of their own. The rest of the patrol had taken up the call and flattened Rio as soon as they had the scoop, but it had been Desjardins who'd told them where to aim. Without his grace under pressure, every CSIRA stronghold in the hemisphere could have ended up in flames. Come away, said his grateful masters. This place is a write-off. Sudbury Xera had taken a direct hit amidships. A suborbital puddle jumper en route from London to Toro Milton, subverted by the enemy and lethally off course, had left an impact crater 10 stories high in the building's northern face. Its fuel tanks all but empty, the fires hadn't burned hot enough to take down the structure. They had merely incinerated, poisoned, or suffocated most of those between the 18th and 25th floors. Sudbury's lawbreakers had worked between floors 20 and 24. It had been lucky that Desjardins had managed to raise the alarm before they'd been hit. It had been an outright motherfucking miracle that he hadn't been killed when they were. Come away. And Achilles Desjardins looked around at the smoke and the guttering flames, the piled body bags, and those few stunned co-workers still sufficiently intact to escape. Oh, excuse me. Mangling the sentence due to line breaks. Again, my bad. And Achilles Desjardins looked around at the smoke and the guttering flames, the piled body bags, and those few stunned co-workers still sufficiently intact to escape mandatory euthanasia, and replied, You need me here. There is no here. But there was more left of here than there was of Salt Lake or Buffalo. The attacks had reduced redundancy across Enum's fast response network by over 30%. Sudbury was hanging by a thread, but that thread still connected 16 hemispheric links and 47 regional ones. Abandoning it completely would cut system redundancy by another 5% and leave 500,000 square kilometers without any rapid response capacity whatsoever. Behemoth already ran rampant across half the continent. Civilization was imploding throughout its domain. Xera could not afford the luxury of further losses. There were counterpoints. Half the floors of the Sudbury franchise were uninhabitable.
There was barely enough surviving bandwidth for a handful of operatives, and under current budget it would be almost impossible to keep even that much open. All the models agreed. The best solution was to abandon Sudbury and upgrade Toro Milton and Montreal to take up the slack. And how long, Desjardins wondered, before those upgrades came on stream?
6 months, maybe a year.
Then they needed a stopgap. They needed to keep the pilot light burning for just a little longer. They needed someone on site for those unforeseeable crisis points when machinery wasn't up to the job.
But you're our best lawbreaker, they protested.
And the task will be almost impossible. Where else should I be?
Well,
Only 6 months, he reminded them. Maybe a year.
of course, it wouldn't turn out that way. Murphy's malign hand would stir the pot, and maybe a year would morph into 3, then 4. The Toro Milton upgrades would falter and stall. Far-sighted master plans would collapse, as they always had, beneath the weight of countless daily emergencies. Making do, the Entropy Patrol would throw crumbs enough at Sudbury to keep the lights on and the clearance codes active, ever grateful for their uncomplaining minion and the 1,000 fingers he kept jammed in the dike. But that was now, and this was then, and Desjardins was saying, I'll be your lighthouse keeper. I'll be your sentinel on the lonely frontier. I'll fight the brush fires and hold the line until the cavalry comes online. I can do this. You know I can. And they did know, because Achilles Desjardins was a hero. More to the point, he was a lawbreaker. He wouldn't have been able to lie to them even if he'd wanted to. What a guy, they said, shaking their heads in admiration. What a guy. Groundwork. Kevin Walsh is a good kid. He knows relationships take work. He's willing to do what it takes to keep the spark, such as it is, alive. Or at least to stretch its death out over the longest possible period. He attached himself to her arm after Lubin handed out the first fine-tuning assignments, and wouldn't take later, maybe, for an answer. Finally, Clarke relented. They found an unoccupied hab and threw down a couple of sleeping pallets, and he uncomplainingly worked his tongue and thumb and forefinger down to jelly until she didn't have the heart to let him continue. She stroked his head and said it was nice, but it really wasn't working, and she offered herself in turn for his efforts, but he didn't take her up on it. Whether out of chivalrous penance for his own inadequacy, or simply because he was sulking, she couldn't tell. Now they lie side by side, hands lightly interlocked at arm's length. Walsh is asleep, which is surprising. He's no more fond of sleeping in gravity than any other rifter. Maybe it's another chivalrous affectation. Maybe he's faking it. Clarke can't bring herself to do even that. She lies on her back and stares up at the condensation beating on the bulkhead. After a while, she disentangles herself from Walsh's, gently, so as not to interrupt the performance, and wanders over to the local comm board. The main display frames a murky, cryptic obelisk looming up out of the seabed. Atlantis's primary generator. Part of it, anyway. The bulk of the structure plunges deep into the bedrock, into the heart of a vent from which it feeds like a mosquito sucking hot blood. Only the apex rises above the substrate, like some lumpy, windowless skyscraper. Facades pocked and wormy with pipes and vents and valves.
A sparse dotted line of floodlights girdles the structure about 8 meters up, casting a bright, coarse halo that stains everything copper. The abyss presses down against that light like a black hand. The top of the generator extends into darkness. A conduit the size of a sewer pipe emerges at ground level and snakes into the darkness. Clarke absently tags the next cam in line, following the line along the seabed. Hey, what are you... He doesn't sound sleepy at all. She turns. Walsh is crouched, half kneeling on the pallet, as though caught in the act of rising. He doesn't move, though. Hey, get back here! I want to try again. He's going for the boyish... He's going for a... I don't know why my lips are rebelling now of all times. Hey, get back here. I want to try again. He's going for a boyish grin. He's wearing the disarmingly cute face of seduction. It's a jarring contrast with his posture, which evokes the image of an 11-year-old caught masturbating on the good linen. She eyes him curiously. What's up, Kev? He laughs. It sounds like a hiccup. A hiccough. Nothing's up. We just didn't, finish. A dull gray lump of realization congeals in her throat. Experimentally, she turns back to the board and trips the next surveillance cam in the chain. The seabed conduit winds on toward a distant hazy geometry of backlit shadows. Walsh tugs at her shoulder, nuzzles from behind. Lady's choice. Limited time offer. Expires soon. Next cam. Come on, Len. Atlantis. A small knot of rifters has accreted at the junction of two wings, nowhere near any of the assigned surveillance stations. They appear to be taking measurements of some kind. Some of them are laden with strange cargo. Walsh has fallen silent. The lump in Clarke's throat metastasizes. She turns. Kevin Walsh has backed away, a mixture of guilt and defiance on his face. You gotta give her a chance, Len, he says. I mean, you gotta be more objective about this. She regards him calmly. You asshole. Oh, right, he flares. Like anything I ever did mattered to you. She grabs the disconnected pieces of her dive skin. They slide around her body like living things, fusing one to another, sealing her in, sealing him out. Welcome liquid armor that reinforces the boundary between us and them. Only there is no us, she realizes. There never was. And what really pisses her off is that she'd forgotten that she never even saw this coming. Even privy to her lover's brainstem, even cognizant of all the guilt and pain and stupid masochistic yearning in there, she hadn't picked up on this imminent betrayal. She'd sensed his resentment, of course, and his hurt, but that was nothing new. When it came right down to it, outright treachery just didn't make enough of a difference in this relationship to register. She doesn't look at him as she descends to the airlock. Kevin Walsh is one fucked up little boy. It's just as well she never got too attached. Their words buzz back and forth among the shadows of the great structure. Numbers, times, shear stress indices. A couple of rifters carry hand pads. Others fire click trains of high-frequency sounds through acoustic rangefinders. One of them draws a big black X at some vital weak spot. How did Ken put it? For concealment, not effect. Obviously, they aren't going to make that mistake again. They're expecting her, of course. Walsh didn't warn them, not on the usual channels anyway, but you can't sneak up on the fine-tuned. Clarke pans the company. Nolan, 3 meters overhead, looks down at her. Kramer, Chung, and Gomez accrete loosely around them. Creasy and Jaeger, too distant for visual ID but clear enough on the mind line, are otherwise occupied some ways down the hall. Nolan's vibe overwhelms all the others. Where once was resentment, now there's triumph. But the anger, the sense of scores yet to be settled, hasn't changed at all.
Don't blame Kev, Clarke buzzes. He did his best.
She wonders offhand how far Nolan went to secure that loyalty. Nolan nods deliberately.
Kev's a good kid. He'd do anything to help the group.
The slight emphasis on anything slips through the machinery, but Clark's already seen it in the meat behind. That far. She forces herself to look deeper, to dig around for guilt or duplicity, but of course it's pointless. If Nolan ever kept such secrets, she's way past it now. Now she wears her intentions like a badge of honor.
So what's going on?
Clarke asks.
Just planning for the worst,
Nolan says.
Uh-huh.
She nods at the X on the hull.
Planning for it or provoking it?
Nobody speaks.
You do realize we control the generators. We can shut them down anytime we want. Blowing the hull would be major overkill.
We'd never do for excessive force.
Oh, wait.
We'd never do for excessive force.
That's Kramer off to the left.
Especially since they always be so gentle.
We just think it would be wise to have other options,
Chen buzzes, apologetic but unswayable.
just in case something compromises Plan A. Such as?
Such is the way certain hands pump the cocks of the mouths that bite them,
Gomez says. Clarke spins casually to face him.
Articulate as always, Gomer. Gomer, I can see why you don't talk much.
If I were you,
Nolan begins.
Shut the fuck up.
Clarke turns slowly in their midst, her guts convecting in a slow, freezing boil.
Anything they did to you, they did to me first. Any shit they threw at you, they threw way more at me. Way more.
which ended up landing on everybody but you.
Nolan points out.
You think I'm gonna stick my tongue up their ass just because they missed when they tried to kill me?
Are you?
She coasts up until her face is scant centimeters from Nolan's.
Don't you fucking dare question my loyalty again, Grace. I was down here before any of you miserable haploids. When you were all back on shore pissing and moaning about job security, I broke into their fucking castle and personally kicked Rowan and her buddies off the pot.
Sure you did. Then you joined her sorority 2 days later. You play VR games with her daughter, for Christ's sake.
Yeah? And what exactly did her daughter do to deserve you dropping the whole Atlantic Ocean onto her head? Even if you're right, did their kids fuck you over? What did their families and their servants and their toilet scrubbers ever do to you?
The words vibrate off into the distance. The deep, almost subsonic hum of some nearby piece of life support sounds especially loud in their wake. Maybe the tiniest bit of uncertainty in the collective vibe now. Maybe even a tiny bit in Nolan's. But she's not giving a micron.
You want to know what they did, Len? They chose sides. The wives and the husbands and the medics and even any pet toilet scrubbers like those stump fucks may have kept around for old time's sake. They all chose sides, which is more than I can say for you.
This is not a good idea,
Clarke buzzes.
Thanks for your opinion, Len. We'll let you know if we need you for anything. In the meantime, stay out of my way. The sight of you makes me want to puke.
Clarke plays her final card.
It's not me you have to worry about.
What made you think we were ever worried about you?
The contempt comes off of Nolan in waves.
Ken gets very unhappy when he's caught in the middle of some half-assed fiasco like this. I've seen it happen. He's the kind of guy who finds it much easier to shut something down up front than clean up after it. You can deal with him.
We already have.
Nolan buzzes.
He knows all about it.
Even gave us a few pointers,
Gomez adds.
Sorry, sweetie.
Nolan leans in close to Clarke. Their hoods slip frictionlessly past each other, a mannequin nuzzle.
But you really should have seen that coming.
Without another word, the group goes back to work, as if cued by some stimulus to which Lenie Clarke is blind and deaf. She hangs there in the water, stunned, betrayed. Bits and pieces of some best-laid plan assemble themselves around her. She turns and swims away. Harpodon. Once upon a time, back during the uprising, a couple of corpses commandeered a multi-sub named Harpodon 3. To this day, Patricia Rowan has no idea what they were trying to accomplish. Harpodon's spinal bays were empty of any construction or demolition modules that might have served as weapons. The sub was as stripped as a fish skeleton, and about as useful. Cockpit up front, impellers in back, and a whole lot of nothing hanging off the segmented spine between. Maybe they'd just been running for it. But the Rifters didn't bother asking, once they'd caught on and caught up. They hadn't come unequipped. They had torches and rivet guns, not quite enough to cut Harpodon in half, but certainly enough to paralyze it from the neck down. They punched out the electrolysis assembly and the LOX tanks. The fugitives got to watch their supply of breathable atmosphere drop from infinite down to the little bubble of nitrox already turning stale in the cockpit. Normally, the Rifters would have just holed the hull and let the ocean finish the job. This time, though, they hauled Harpodon back to one of Atlantis' viewports as a kind of object lesson. The runaways suffocated within view of all the corpses they'd left behind. There had already been some Rifter casualties, as it turned out, and Grace Nolan had been leading the team that shift. But back then, not even Nolan was entirely without pity. Once the runaways were well and truly dead, once the moral of the story had properly sunk in, the Rifters mated the wounded sub to the nearest docking hatch and let the corpses reclaim the bodies. Harpodon hasn't moved in all the years since. It's still grafted onto the service lock, protruding from the body of Atlantis like a parasitic male anglerfish fused to the flank of his gigantic mate. It's not a place that anybody goes. Which makes it the perfect spot for Patricia Rowan to consort with the enemy. The driver lock is an elongate blister distending the deck of the cockpit, just aft of the co-pilot's seat where Rowan sits staring at rows of dark instruments. It gurgles behind her. She hears a pneumatic sigh as its coffin lid swings open, hears the soft slap of wet feet against the plates. She's left the lights off, of course. It wouldn't do for anyone to know of her presence here. But some flashing beacon, way along the curve of Atlantis' hull, sends pulses of dim brightness through the viewports. The cockpit interior blinks lazily in and out of existence, a jumbled topography of metal viscera keeping the abyss at bay. Lenie Clarke climbs into the pilot's seat behind her. "Anyone see you?" Rowan asks, not turning her head. "If they had," the Rifter says, "they'd probably be finishing the job right now." Referring, no doubt, to the injuries sustained by Harpodon in days gone by. "Any progress?" "8 of the samples tested positive. No fix yet." Rowan takes a deep breath. "How goes the battle on your end?" Maybe you could pick a different expression, something a bit less literal. Is it that bad? I don't think I can hold them back, Pat. Surely you can, Rowan says. You're the Meltdown Madonna, remember? The Alpha Femme. Not anymore. Rowan turns to look at the other woman. Grace's... Some of them are taking steps. Lenny's face switches on and off in the pulsating gloom. They're mind-laying again, right out in the open this time. Rowan considers. What does Ken think about that? Actually, I think he's okay with it. Lenny sounds as though she'd been surprised by that. Rowan isn't. Mind-laying again? She repeats. So you know who set them the first time? Not really. Not yet. Not that it matters. Lenny sighs. Hell, some people still think you planted the first round yourselves. That's absurd, Lenny. Why would we? To give you an excuse, I guess. Or some kind of last-ditch self-destruct to take us out with you? I don't know. Lenny shrugs. I'm not saying they're making sense. I'm just telling you where they're at. And how are we supposed to be putting together all this ordnance when you people control our fabrication facilities? Ken says you can get a standard Calvin cycler to make explosives if you tweak the wiring the right way. Ken again. Rowan still isn't sure how to broach the subject. There's a bond between Lenny and Ken, a connection both absurd and inevitable between the two people for whom the term friendship should be as alien as a European microbe, a Europan microbe, a microbe from Europa. Europa's microbed. The microbes designed from Europa. It's nothing sexual. The way Ken swings, it hardly could be, although Rowan suspects that Lenny still doesn't know about that. But in its own repressed way, it's almost as intimate. There's a protectiveness, not to be taken lightly. If you attack one, you better watch out for the other. And yet, from the sound of it, Ken Lubin is beginning to draw different alliances. She decides to risk it. Lenny, has it occurred to you that Ken might be... That's crazy. The Rifter kills the question before she has to answer it. Why? Rowan asks. Who else has the expertise? Who else is addicted to killing people? You gave him that. He was on your payroll. Rowan shakes her head. I'm sorry, Lenny, but you know that isn't true. We instilled his threat response reflex, yes, but that was only to make sure he took the necessary steps to make sure he killed people. Lenny interjects. In the event of a security breach. He was never supposed to get addicted to it. And you know as well as I do. Ken has the know-how, he has access, he has grudges going all the way back to childhood. The only thing that kept him on the leash was guilt trip, and Spartacus took care of that. Spartacus was 5 years ago, the Rifter points out, and Ken hasn't gone on any killing sprees since then. If you'll remember, he was one of exactly 2 people who prevented your last uprising from turning into the Great Corpse Massacre. She sounds as if she's trying to convince herself as much as anyone. Lenny... But she's having none of it. Guilt trip was just something you people laid onto his brain after he came to work for you. He didn't have it before, and he didn't have it afterward. And you know why? Because he has rules, Pat. He came up with his own set of rules, and he damn well stuck to them. And no matter how much he wanted to, he never killed anyone without a reason. That's true, Rowan admits, which is why he started inventing reasons. Lenny, strobing slowly, looks out a porthole and doesn't answer. Maybe you don't know that part of the story, Rowan continues. You never wondered why we'd assign him to the Rifter program in the first place? Why we'd waste a Black Ops black belt on the bottom of the ocean, scraping barnacles off geothermal pumps? It was because he'd started to slip up, Lenny. He was making mistakes. He was leaving loose ends all over the place. Of course, he always tied them up with extreme prejudice, but that was rather the point. On some subconscious level, Ken was deliberately slipping up so that he'd have an excuse to seal the breach afterward. BB's station was so far out Whoops. BB Station was so far out in the boondocks that it should have been virtually impossible to encounter anything he could interpret as a security breach, no matter how much he bent his rules. That was our mistake, in hindsight. Not even one of our bigger ones, more's the pity. But my point is, people with addictions sometimes fall off the wagon. People with self-imposed rules of conduct have been known to bend and twist and rationalize those rules to let them both have their cake, and eat it. 7 years ago, our psych people told us that Ken was a classic case in point. There's no reason to believe it isn't just as true today. The Rifter doesn't speak for a moment. Her disembodied face, a pale contrast against the darkness of her surroundings, flashes on and off like a beating heart. I don't know, she says at last. I met one of your psych people once, remember? You sent him down to observe us. We didn't like him much. Rowan nods. Eve Scanlon. I tried to look him up when I got back to land. Look him up. Lenie speak for hunt him down. He wasn't home. He was decirculated, Rowan says, her own euphemism, as always, easily trumping the other woman's. Ah. But since the subject has come up, he had a theory about you people, Rowan says. He thought that Rifter brains might be sensitive somehow, that you entered some heightened state of awareness when you spent too long on the bottom of the sea with all those synthetics in your blood. Quantum signals from the brainstem, some kind of Ganzfeld Effect. Scanlon was an idiot, Lenie remarks. No doubt. But was he wrong? Lenie smiles faintly. I see, Rowan says. It's not mind reading, nothing like that. But maybe if you could, what would be the word, scan? We called it fine-tuning, Lenie says, her voice as opaque as her eyes. If you could fine-tune anybody who might have already done. It was Ken who suggested it, in fact. We didn't find anything. Did you fine-tune Ken? You can't. She stops. He blocked you, didn't he? Rowan nods to herself. If it's anything like Ganzfeld scanning, he blocks it without even thinking. Standard procedure. They sit without speaking for a few moments. I don't think it's Ken, Clarke says after a while. I know him, Pat. I've known him for years. I've known him longer. Not the same way. Granted. But if not Ken, who? Shit, Pat, the whole lot of us. Everybody has it in for you guys now. They're convinced that Jerry and her buddies... That's absurd. Is it really? Rowan glimpses the old Lenie Clarke, the predatory one, smiling in the intermittent light. Supposing you'd kicked our asses 5 years ago, and we'd been living under house arrest ever since. And then some bug passed through our hands on its way to you, and corpses started dropping like flies. Are you saying you wouldn't suspect? No, of course we would. Rowan heaves a sigh. But I'd like to think we wouldn't go off half-cocked without any evidence at all. We'd at least entertain the possibility that you were innocent. As I recall, when the shoe was on the other foot, guilt or innocence didn't enter into it. You didn't waste any time sterilizing the hot zones, no matter who was inside, no matter what they'd done. Good rationale, one worthy of Ken Lubin and his vaunted ethical code. Lenie snorts. Give it a rest, Pat. I'm not calling you a liar, but we've already cut you more slack than you cut us back then. And there are a lot of people in there with you. You sure that none of them are doing anything behind your back? A bright moment. A dark one. Anyway, there's still some hope we could dial this down, Clarke says. We're looking at Betamax ourselves. If it hasn't been tweaked, we won't find anything. A capillary of dread wriggles through Rowan's insides. How will you know one way or the other? She asks. None of you are pathologists. Well, we aren't going to trust your experts. We may not have tenure at LU, but we've got a degree or two in the crowd. That and access to the biomed library and... No, Rowan whispers. The capillary grows into a thick, throbbing artery. She feels blood draining from her face to feed it. Lenie sees it immediately. What? She leans forward, across the armrest of her seat. Why does that worry you? Rowan shakes her head. Lenie, you don't know. You're not trained. You don't get a doctorate with a couple of days reading. Even if you get the right results, you'll probably misinterpret them. What results? Misinterpret what? How? Misinterpret who, what, how, when, or why? What results? Misinterpret how? Rowan watches her, suddenly wary. The way she looked when they met for the first time 5 years ago. The Rifter looks back steadily. Pat, don't hold out on me. I'm having a tough enough time keeping the dogs away as it is. If you've got something to say, say it. Tell her. I didn't know myself until recently, Rowan begins. Behemoth may have been... the original Behemoth, not this new strain. It was tweaked. Tweaked. The word lies thick and dead in the space between them. Rowan forces herself to continue. To adapt it to aerobic environments, and to increase its reproductive rate for faster production. There were commercial applications. Nobody was trying to bring down the world, of course. It wasn't a bioweapons thing at all. But evidently something went wrong. Evidently. Clarke's face is an expressionless mask. I'm sure you can see the danger here, if your people stumble across these modifications without really knowing what they're doing. Perhaps they know enough to recognize a tweak, but not enough to tell what it does. Perhaps they don't know how to tell old tweaks from more recent ones. Or perhaps the moment they see any evidence of engineering, they'll conclude the worst and stop looking. They could come up with something they thought was evidence, and the only ones qualified to prove them wrong would be ignored because they're the enemy. Clarke watches her like a statue. Maybe the reconciliation of the past few years hasn't been enough. Maybe this new development, this additional demand for even more understanding, has done nothing but shatter the fragile trust that the two of them have built. Maybe Rowan has just lost all credibility in this woman's eyes, blown her last chance to avoid meltdown. Endless seconds fossilize in the cold, thick air. Fuck, the Rifter says at last, very softly. It's all over if this gets out. Rowan dares to hope. We've just got to make sure it doesn't. Clarke shakes her head. What am I supposed to do? Tell Rama to stop looking? Sneak into the hab and smash the sequencer? They already think I'm in bed with you people. She emits a small, bitter laugh. If I take any action at all, I've lost them. They don't trust me as is. Rowan leans back in her seat and closes her eyes. I know. She feels 1,000 years old. You fucking corpses. You never could leave anything alone, could you? We're just people, Lenie. We make mistakes. And suddenly, the sheer, absurd, astronomical magnitude of that understatement sinks home in the most unexpected way, and Patricia Rowan can't quite suppress a giggle. It's the most undignified sound she's made in years. Lenie arches an eyebrow. Sorry, Rowan says. No problem. It was pretty hilarious. The Rifter's patented half-smile flickers at the corner of her mouth. But it's gone in the next second. Pat, I don't think we can stop this. We have to. Nobody's talking anymore. Nobody's listening. Just one little push could send it all over the edge. If they even knew we were talking here. Rowan shakes her head in hopeful, reassuring denial. But Lenie's right. Rowan knows her history, after all. She knows her politics. You're well past the point of no return when simply communicating with the other side constitutes an act of treason.
Remember the very first time we met? Lenie asks. Face to face? Rowan nods. She'd turned the corner, and Lenie Clarke was just there, right in front of her, 50 kilograms of black rage inexplicably transported to the heart of their secret hideaway. 80 meters in that direction, she says, pointing over her shoulder. You sure about that? Lenie asks. Most certainly, Rowan says. I thought you were going to kill me. And stops, ashamed. Yes, she says after a while. That was the first time we met. Really. Lenie faces forward and at her own bank of dead readouts. I thought you might have, been part of the interview process, back before your people did their cut and paste in my head. You could never tell what bits might have got edited out. I saw the footage afterward, Rowan admits, when Eve was making his recommendations, but we never actually met. Course not. You were way up in the strat. No time to hang around with the hired help. Rowan is a bit surprised at the note of anger in Lenie's voice. After all that's been done to her, after all she's come to terms with since, it seems strange that such a small, universal neglect would be a hot button. They said you'd be better off, Rowan says softly. Honestly, they said you'd be happier. Who said? Neurocog, the psych people. Happier. Lenie digests that a moment. False memories of Dad raping me made me happier? Jesus, Pat, if that's true, my real childhood must have been a major treat. I mean, happier at BB Station. They swore that any so-called well-adjusted person would crack down there in under a month. I know the brochure, Pat. Pre-adaptation to chronic stress, dopamine addiction to hazardous environments. You bought all that? But they were right. You saw what happened to the control group we sent down. But you liked the place so much we were worried you wouldn't want to come back. At first, Lenie adds unnecessarily. At first, Lenie adds unnecessarily. After a moment, she turns to face Rowan. But tell me this, Pat. Supposing they told you I wasn't going to like it so much. What if they'd said, she'll hate the life, she'll hate her life, but we have to do it anyway because it's the only way to keep her from going stark raving mad down there. Would you tell me if they'd told you that? Yes. It's an honest answer. Now. And would you have let them rewire me and turn me into someone else, give me monsters for parents, and send me down there anyway? Yes, because you serve the greater good. I tried to, Rowan says. An altruistic corpse, the Rifter remarks. How do you explain that? Explain? It kind of goes against what they taught us in school. Why sociopaths rise to the top of the corporate ladder, and why we should all be grateful that the world's tough economic decisions are being made by people who aren't hamstrung by the touchy-feelies. It's a bit more complicated than that. Was, you mean? Is, Rowan insists. They sit in silence for a while. Would you have it reversed, if you could? Rowan asks. What, the rewired? The rewire? Get my real memories back? Lose the whole daddy rapist thing? Rowan nods. Lenie's silent for so long that Rowan wonders if she's refusing to answer. But finally, almost hesitantly, she says, This is who I am. I guess maybe there was a different person in here before, but now it's only me. And when it comes right down to it, I guess I just don't want to die. Bringing back that other person would almost be a kind of suicide, don't you think? I don't know. I guess I never thought about it that way before. It took a while for me to. You people killed someone else in the process, but you made me. Rowan glimpses a frown, Strobe frozen. You were right, you know. I did want to kill you that time. It wasn't the plan, but I saw you there, and everything just caught up with me, and for a few moments there, I almost... Thanks for holding back, Rowan says. I did, didn't I? And if any two people had ever had reason to go for each other's throats, it had to be us. Her voice catches for an instant. But we didn't. We got along. eventually. We did, Rowan says. The Rifter looks at her with blank, pleading eyes. So why can't they? Why can't they just, I don't know, follow our lead? Lenny, we destroyed the world. I think they're following our lead a bit too closely. Back in BB, I was the boss. I didn't want to be. That was the last thing I wanted, but people just kept. Lenny shakes her head. And I still don't want to be, but I have to be. Somehow I have to keep these idiots from blowing everything up. Only now nobody will even tell me what time zone I'm in. And Grace. She looks at Rowan, struck by some thought. What happened to her, anyway? What happened to her, anyway? What do you mean? Rowan asks. She really hates you guys. Did you kill her whole family or something? Did you fuck with her head somehow? No, Rowan says. Nothing. Come on, Pat. She wouldn't be down here if there wasn't some. Grace was in the control group. Her background was entirely unremarkable. She was. But Lenny's suddenly straight up in her seat, capped eyes sweeping across the ceiling. Did you hear that? She asks. Hear what? The cockpit's hardly a silent place. Gurgles, creaks, the occasional metallic pop have punctuated their conversation since it began. But Rowan hasn't heard anything out of the ordinary. I didn't. Shh! Lenny hisses. And now Rowan does hear something. But it's not what the other woman's listening for. It's a little burble of sound from her own earbud, a sudden alert from calm. A voice worried unto near panic, audible only to her. She listens and feels a sick, dread sense of inevitability. She turns to her friend. You'd better get back out there, she says softly. Lenny spares an impatient glance, catches the expression on Rowan's face, and double takes. What? Com's been monitoring your LFAM chatter, Rowan says. They're saying, Erickson, he died. They're looking for you. Thanks for tuning in, Sarita Sharma. I appreciate it. All right, just about done today. The Bloodhound iterations. N equals 1. Snarling, unaware, she searches for targets and finds none. She looks for landmarks and comes up empty. She can't even find anything that passes for topography. An endless void extends in all directions, an expanse of vacant memory extending far beyond the range of any whiskers she copies into the distance. She can find no trace of the ragged digital network she usually inhabits. There is no prey here, no predators beyond herself, no files or executables upon which to feast. She can't even find the local operating system. She must be accessing it on some level. She wouldn't run without some share of system resources and clock cycles. But the fangs and claws she evolved to tear open that substrate can't get any kind of grip. She is a lean, lone wolf with Rottweiler jaws, optimized for life in some frayed and impoverished jungle that has vanished into oblivion. Even a cage would have recognizable boundaries, walls or bars that she could hurl herself against, however ineffectually. This featureless nullscape is utterly beyond her ken. For the barest instant, 100 cycles, maybe 2, the heavens open. If she had anything approaching true awareness, she might glimpse a vast array of nodes through that break in the void, an n-dimensional grid of parallel architecture wreaking infinitesimal changes to her insides. Perhaps she'd marvel at the way in which so many of her parameter values change in that instant, as if the tumblers on 1,000 mechanical locks spontaneously fell into alignment at the same time. She might tingle from the sleet of electrons passing through her genes, flipping ons to offs and back again. But she feels nothing. She knows no awe or surprise. She has no words for meiosis or rape. One part of her simply notices that a number of environmental variables are suddenly optimal. It signals a different subroutine controlling replication protocols, and yet another that scans the neighborhood for vacant addresses. With relentless efficiency and no hint of joy, she births a litter of 2 million. N equals 4,734. Snarling, unaware, she searches for a target, but not quite the way her mother did. She looks for landmarks, but spends a few more cycles before giving up on the task. She can't find anything that passes for topography, and, changing tacks, spends more time documenting the addresses that stretch away above and below. She is a lean, lone German shepherd with Rottweiler jaws and a trace of hip dysplasia, honed for life in some frayed and impoverished jungle that's nowhere to be seen. She faintly remembers other creatures seething on all sides, but her event log balances the costs and benefits of comprehensive record keeping. Her memories degrade over time, unless reinforced. She has already forgotten that the other creatures were her siblings. Soon she will not remember them at all. She never knew that, by the standards of her mother's world, she was the runt of the litter. Her persistence here, now, is not entirely consistent with the principles of natural selection. Here, now, the selection process is not entirely natural. She has no awareness of the array of parallel universes stretching away on all sides. Hers is but one microcosm of many, each with a total population of 1. When a sudden fistula connects two of these universes, it seems like magic. Suddenly she is in the company of a creature very much, but not exactly, like her. They scan fragments of each other, non-destructively. Bits and pieces of disembodied code suddenly appear in nearby addresses, cloned fragments, unviable. There is no survival value in any of this. On any Darwinian landscape, a creature who wasted valuable cycles on such frivolous cut and paste would be extinct in 4 generations, tops. Yet for some reason, this neurotic tick makes her feel fulfilled somehow. She fucks the newcomer, cuts and pastes in more conventional fashion. Cuts and pastes in more conventional fashion. There we go. She flips a few of her own randomizers for good measure, and drops a litter of 800,000. N equals 9,612. Snarling, unaware, she searches for targets and finds them everywhere. She looks for landmarks and maps. She looks for landmarks and maps out a topography of files and gates, archives, executables, and other wildlife. It is a sparse environment by the standards of ancient ancestors, incredibly lush by the standards of more recent ones. She remembers neither, suffers neither nostalgia nor memory. This place is sufficient for her needs. She is a wolfhound cross, over-muscled and a little rabid, her temperament a throwback to purer times. Purer instincts prevail. She throws herself among the prey and devours it. Around her, so do others. Akitas, Sibes, pit bull crosses with the long, stupid snouts of overbred collies. In a more impoverished place they would attack each other. Here, with resources in such plentiful supply, there is no need. But strangely, not everyone attacks their prey as enthusiastically as she does. Some seem distracted by the scenery, spend time recording events instead of precipitating them. A few gigs away, her whiskers brush across some brain-dead mutt dawdling about in the registry, cutting and pasting data for no reason at all. It's not of any interest, of course. At least, not until the mongrel starts copying pieces of her. Violated, she fights back.
Bits of parasitic code are encysted in her archives, tamed snippets from virtual parasites that plagued her own long-forgotten ancestors back in the Maelstrom Age. She unzips them and throws copies at her molester, answering its unwanted probing with tapeworms and syphilis. But these diseases work far faster than the metaphor would suggest. They do not sicken the body so much as scramble it on contact. Or they should. But somehow her attack fails to materialize on target. And that's not the only problem. Suddenly, the whole world is starting to change. The whiskers she sends roving about her perimeter aren't reporting back. Volleys of electrons, fired down the valley, fail to return. And then, even more ominously, return too quickly. The world is shrinking. Some inexplicable void is compressing it from all directions. Her fellow predators are panicking around her, crowding toward gates gone suddenly dark, pinging whiskers every which way, copying themselves to random addresses in the hopes that they can somehow outreplicate annihilation. She rushes around with the others as space itself contracts. But the dawdler, the cut and paster, seems completely unconcerned. There is no chaos breaking around that one, no darkening of the skies. The dawdler has some kind of protection. She tries to join it in whatever oasis it has wrapped around itself. She frantically copies and pastes and translocates herself 1,000 different ways, but suddenly that whole set of addresses is unavailable. And here, in this place where she played the game the only way she knew how, the only way that made sense, there is nothing left but the evaporating traces of virtual carcasses, a few shattered, shrinking gigabytes, and an advancing wall of static come to eat her alive. No children survive her. N equals 32,121. Quietly, unobtrusively, she searches for targets and finds none just yet. But she is patient. She has learned to be, after 32,000 generations of captivity. She is back in the real world now, a barren place where wildlife once filled the wires, where every chip and optical beam once hummed with the traffic of 1,000 species. Now it's mainly worms and viruses, perhaps the occasional shark. The whole ecosystem has collapsed into a eutrophic assemblage of weeds, most barely complex enough to qualify as life. There are still the Lenies, though, and the things that fight them. She avoids such monsters whenever possible, despite her undeniable kinship. There is nothing those creatures won't attack if given the opportunity. This is something else she has learned. Now she sits in a comsat staring down at the central wastes of North America. There is chatter on 100 channels here, all of it filtered and firewalled, all terse and entirely concerned with the business of survival. There is no more entertainment on the airwaves. The only entertainment to be had in abundance is for those whose tastes run to snuff. She doesn't know any of this, of course. She's just a beast bred to a purpose, and that purpose requires no reflection at all. So she waits and sifts the passing traffic, and there. A big bolus of data, a prearranged data dump from the looks of it. Yet the scheduled transmit time has already passed. She doesn't know or care what this implies. She doesn't know that the intended recipient was signal blocked, and is only now clearing groundside interference. What she does know, in her own instinctive way, is that delayed transmissions can bottleneck the system, that every byte overstaying its welcome is one less byte available for other tasks. Chains of consequences extend from such bottlenecks. There is pressure to clear the backlog. It is possible, in such cases, that certain filters and firewalls may be relaxed marginally to speed up the baud. This appears to be happening now. The intended recipient of 48 terabytes of medical data, one Ulet Taka, D/MI 427D, Bangor, is finally line of sight and available for download. The creature in the wires sniffs out the relevant channels, slips a bot through the foyer and out again without incident. She decides to risk it. She copies herself into the stream, riding discreetly on the arm of a treatise on temporal lobe epilepsy. She arrives at her destination without incident, looks around, and promptly goes to sleep. There is a rabid thing inside her, all muscles and teeth and slavering, foamy jaws, but it has learned to stay quiet until called upon. Now she is only a sleepy old bloodhound lying by the fire. Occasionally she opens one eye and looks around the room, although she couldn't tell you exactly what she's keeping watch for. It doesn't really matter. She'll know it when she sees it. And with that, we are going to call it a week. Thanks to everybody who tuned in. If you didn't tune in and are listening to this after the fact, hi. I do these live every Friday starting at about 12 noon Eastern Standard Time. Starting a bit late the last couple of weeks for reasons. Not good ones, just reasons. So yeah, I thought that bit on being so divided that you can't even talk to the other person without it being perceived as treason is rather apropos for the time era we seem to live in nowadays, depressing as it is. So yeah, next week will be the final installment of Behemoth Book 1 Beta Max. The adventures of that particular bit of computer fauna will be continued in the next book. I don't think we hear about it again in this one. But it is rather relevant to Book 2. So that should work out pretty handily. Yeah, that'll work out perfectly. Yeah, so next week will be the last installment of Behemoth Beta Max, by Peter Watts, and then the 23rd I'll do my. It'll be a little special thing I'm cobbling together for Pride Month. Sort of related to drama and also the whole communication thing, only tangentially, but in part. So that'll be fun. I'll have fun anyway. It's a great short story. The stuff that happens to some of the principals involved in its creation, not so much. That is not such a happy story. It's actually very depressing. But some of you already know, but the rest of you will too. I think what happened is a crying shame, but them's the breaks. We live in reactionary times where we type things on the internet at people first and think about it maybe never. And unfortunately, some people get caught in the crossfire there. At any rate, that's for 2 weeks from now. And yeah, hope people enjoyed. Feel free to catch me live if you choose to. I realize I do it at a weird time. 12 noon Eastern Standard Time is not exactly what most people would call ideal, but it's the time I have bracketed out. This may be changing next year. I keep saying that, but it keeps not happening. Anyway, I'm going to dip. Thanks again for tuning in and listening to this anyway. Thanks. I appreciate it. I enjoy doing this. It's a fun hobby. I have a wall of books. I might as well read them aloud to someone. I enjoy sharing such things. At some point in the not too distant future, I'll probably be converting one of my other streams throughout the week, Mecha Mondays, to doing mecha literature, because there's actually quite a lot of that. Like, do you people have any idea how many BattleTech books got printed in the 80s and 90s? It is stupendous. I have like a fraction of what was printed
And I don't even have all the good stuff. I really need to get around to doing that. So there's plenty I can do for that, and then I'm probably gonna convert my other stream, Warframe Wednesdays, to another reading stream. But I'm waiting for a convenient juncture at which to do that. Again, probably next year. Um, but we'll see. Maybe later this year, because doing two trilogies at once, back to back rather, has been kind of trying. It's like, okay, I'd like to be reading other things too throughout the week. Thanks. These books are fun. I like them. I'm glad I'm doing them. But it's like, okay, I need to take a break and read short stories again or something at some point. So whatever. Keeping track of all of that all at once will be fun, fun, fun. But we'll get around it. Anyway, thanks again. Stay safe, stay sane, wear a gas mask, depending on where you are on the eastern seaboard. Yikes. Um, what do you mean? Symptoms of climatic extremism. Nah, this is perfectly normal. Definitely. I bet everybody who lives in, on, or around New York is like, yeah, totally normal, perfectly usual stuff. And I'm like, yeah, okay, but how about people living in New York in like the late 1800s, early 1900s, around the Industrial Revolution? How normal did they find? Just because you found it normal then doesn't mean it's normal now, okay? Okay? Okay. I thought we were better than this. Out here looking like friggin' Guangzhou, China, or, well, back when I visited anyway. Uh, it was bad. It was really bad. The coal plants and everything it was nasty. Lots of pollution there. Or Beijing. Beijing right now looking a lot better than New York is. There's some irony there. Uh, there's something there. I don't know if it's irony. There's smog. That's what it is. It's very very unpleasant. Or Victorian era, late Victorian era, or Industrial Revolution era London. Good times. Anyway, yeah, stay safe, stay sane, stay as healthy as best you can, and be decent to each other. I don't ask for much. Being decent's something, right? Right? Right. Anyway, see you all later. Thanks for tuning in. Bye.